Imagine the character now looking at yourself, the writer, in the other chair next to you. What does she think of you?
What is acting for writers?
So, acting for writers, in my book, The Three Wells of Screenwriting, I have a chapter called Acting for Writers. And it came about because I found that there's something that's very difficult to teach writers, which is how to make their characters real and actually perform and behave in ways that's real as a real person would. And what I found is when an actor inhabits a character, sometimes they'll say things like, they'll say, well, my character wouldn't do that. And I'm like, yes, why not? Tell me. A lot of writers or people will say like, well, because I said so in the script. But I'm like, no, the actor is actually living the character and they're being the character and they're actually inhabiting the character in a way that is maybe even more than you could in your brain when you were writing, if you are the kind of writer who doesn't know how to sort of project yourself into your character. So acting for writers came from this idea that actors, when they do something, when they inhabit the character, whatever that magic is that they do when they become the character, they do something that's not dissimilar to when writers imagine themselves into a character. There's something going on there that's a similar thing. Mm-hmm. And so my chapter, Acting for Writers, sort of came out of that. And it's also really important because actors carry the emotional weight of a film. They are the emotion. When we watch a film, we feel what they feel. And that's incredible. So to avoid creating sort of wooden characters that are sort of one-dimensional characters in a way. It's difficult as an actor if you get a script that's like, I have to make this work somehow. You do so much work. And what I was trying to do is almost help writers to create characters that are more well-rounded, that are easy for actors to inhabit. So that's kind of what Acting for Writers is. And I would encourage writers to actually do an acting course, and like even a small one, and just go and feel what it feels like to be these things that you're creating on the page, because it's very easy to just say, well, he walks across the room, and you're like, well, why am I walking across the room? And, well, because I've told you to. No, you need a little bit more than that. Yeah, so.
Well, Angelique, you are a writer as well as an actor. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Which came first?
Acting, very much so, yes. Writing came more out of necessity, and now I'm so grateful for that blessing. And I love it equally. I can't differentiate my love.
Wonderful. Well, let's see the two of you. We don't know what's in store, so we're going to be pleasantly surprised just as the audience is.
Great. Yeah, and Ange, I've just read a script of Ange. It's fantastic. So this is a bit of a sidetrack, but sometimes when actors write scripts, it goes both ways. So sometimes when writers write scripts that are bad for actors, sometimes actors, when I've read some scripts by actors and I'm like, oh, they're not going to understand its words on the page that are important. They're going to do something. Sometimes I've just had this experience where the sitcom that I was writing for, sometimes the actors would try and write episodes and they were always like problematic but Ange created the script that was just, she understood the words on the page, and I was really relieved to see that. I was like, okay, it goes both ways. I think sometimes,
yeah. If I may add to that, I think Matthew mentioned the emotional life of a character, but I think as actors, our job is interpretive art. We have to make these words come alive, not just emotionally, but thought-wise and action-wise and impulse-wise. And from that perspective, it's not just the emotional life of the character, but the motivation I find. With my writing partner, when we write, he's always really good with, we're both good with reasoning, but we have our different strengths, and like he would know what type of weapon to use in what situation, or what car was used in what year. But when it comes to motivation and character arc, my logic is really strong, my reasoning, because that's exactly what we do. We have to somehow make these words sing, and then it's almost like you invert that the other way around, where you have to write the words that come from, something that will eventually become the performance.
Yeah, and actors have these you talk about motivation, so that's like sort of an acting term, is, what's my motivation in the scene? But then there are things like scene goals and objectives within the scene, and like each scene is broken down into these like mini parts, and you have to live them all, and But you were talking about the thoughts behind your brain that's happening for the character in the moment. And I think sometimes writers, when they just sounded like, oh, I'm just picturing a scene where some guy, drives a car through a thing and shoots someone or whatever, they're not thinking about all those acting terms. And I think it's vital.
Yeah, and the arc of not just the story, but each character, especially the protagonist, obviously your typical hero's journey and that kind of thing.
And then the scene art as well. Within the scene, there's a scene arc.
Yes, exactly, the scene arc. And I think another advantage that actors have is we've been on so many sets, ideally. And in that way, we've seen how certain scripts transform, obviously with all the other factors as well, the production design and directing and camera work and all that, but ultimately we get to see the whole process of what it's like to shoot all these different scenes, put them together, see the final product, and we also get to read a heck of a lot of scripts and sometimes just scenes for auditions, and honestly most of them are really bad, well, depending on what kind of level you're at, but it's actually more frequent that you read things that don't quite work, and that can be as useful to kind of think, well, why am I not resonating with this material? And what would I have done differently? And I think the more and more you get exposed to that type of material, rather than only reading your fancy A-lister scripts, which you think is unattainable. So that's another thing that I think is beneficial as an actor.
I'm so glad you mentioned that about the actors being on set and seeing how a script is translated, because I find a lot of the time when first-time writers try and write a script, they've never been on set, and there's actually a big there's a big learning that happens when you're seeing the thing being translated into the thing that it actually will be one day on the screen, right? If you've been on set, I worked as an extra on a set, just a random small, I was like a background extra, but I was watching and seeing how this thing is translated, because one of the other errors that writers often do is they will write something that's actually almost impossible to turn into a thing because they don't know what it's like. And I think your thing about actors being on set and seeing that is really important. And then also actors reading scripts. Most people don't read scripts. Most writers actually don't. Most first-time screenwriters will have read novels, but they very rarely read screenplays. And I actually find actors do read a lot more screenplays. So yeah, good point.
Yeah, by default. And also regarding what you just said about how writers sometimes don't get to experience the actual practicality of their words. I think, with changes that have been made with budget cuts, a lot of writers' room have gotten so small and short that they don't often get to actually write during the production phase. So I've heard of shows where literally the writers will not have been to set once. They don't get to see what they're writing for. And it shows when you watch the show, because you have to know what the space is like. You have to understand how many people can fit in here, what's practical in terms of everything and anything, the weather, just the amount of people. So it's so important to physically, the two go hand in hand. And also I want to say, when you want to produce your stuff on top of that, it's so useful to have the experience of being on set, because you know how to write for whatever budget you have in mind as well. So that's really useful.
Exactly. Yes.
You're not going to put 1,000 extras in if you can't afford it, or use the fancy location that's going to be so expensive.
Yeah, I think in a way it can all be summed up to embodying the character and embodying the moment on the screen, right? So you're writing something and then there it is. And so what I like to try with us is a exercise that comes from my book, which is called Becoming the Character. And it's about how you can do a small acting technique. This is an exercise that comes from the acting world to sort of at least be your character for a moment. And so what we're going to experiment with today is Ange has a character from a story that she's created. We're not going to speak too much about the story necessarily, and I think as far as I understand, it's quite a raw story, which is the perfect moment, because the best moment for this thing to work is when you are in the development phase and you're not sure about who your character is, because characters are elusive beasts to lock down as a writer. When we first picture them, they're a little bit like an abstract painting, and then they look like weird, like they got a face and a nose and an eye. But the more we spend time with them, they eventually become like a beautiful oil painting, and we know who they are. And part of the way of becoming to know one's character, one of the things that could be useful is doing this exercise that we're going to do now.
I like that. They become more pixelated and more defined. The closer you get, the more you develop them.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So should we just jump into it?
Yeah, let's do
Let's
it.
do.
Cool.
Yeah,
Okay,
excited
cool.
to see.
Okay.
So I'm going to just stand off screen. She's going to eventually
Perfect.
sit in that chair to become a character. So she'll be looking at the chair occasionally. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited. Okay. Sorry.
And you want me to keep my eyes open?
No, I'll tell you when
You'll
to
tell
open
me.
them and
You'll
when to
tell me.
close them.
Perfect,
Yeah.
perfect.
Okay. You ready?
Yep.
Okay. Okay, so Ange, if you could just, actually before I'm going to start this again. Okay, so for those of you watching the video, you can actually watch this right now, but you could re-watch this and just do this exercise on your own, in your own space, just using me as a guide while I talk Ange through the process. So Ange, if you could begin just by closing your eyes and just relaxing your body as much as you can. Just let go of any tension that you might be feeling. Just feel the energy draining out of your body in a relaxing way. Get as centered as you can and as relaxed as you can, as much as you can. Just take a big breath in and out. Perfect. And just keep relaxed and try and keep focused as much as you can. Keep your eyes closed. Think about that character that you have in whatever form they are in your mind at the moment. And then I want you to turn your head and look at the chair next to you. Keep your eyes closed now, but turn your head towards the chair next to you. And when you open your eyes, I want you to picture your character sitting in that chair. And just keep your eyes on the chair. You can open them. Just look at the chair and picture what they look like. Use your imagination. How are they sitting in the chair? Just keep that in your mind. What are they wearing? Are they carrying tension in their body anywhere? What are you feeling about them when you're seeing them there? Are you judging them in any way? Just keep these thoughts in your head and we'll unpack afterwards. Do they have any props with them that they're carrying? Do they have anything at all, like a special wardrobe item? Just use your imagination. If nothing comes to you, that's also fine. And then when you're ready, I want you to go and sit in that chair and sit like the character sits. Become the character in that space. Perfect, good. And keep looking at the chair next to you when you can. Amazing, that's fantastic. Good. Feel what it feels like to be this character in her body. Are you holding any tension anywhere in the body as this character? Monitor your thoughts as this character. What are you thinking? What's the utmost thought in your brain? And as this character, what do you want? And if you like, you can picture your character in a space, whatever it is. Is there anything around you? Any objects? Any environment at all? Good. And keep the focus, keep being this character, and imagine the character now looking at yourself, the writer, in the other chair next to you. What does she think of you? How does she feel about you, the writer? Great, and then let go of that and just become the character again. Just stay in that moment, stay as you are. You can forget about the person next to you. And when you're ready, you can go sit back in your chair and just As you back in the chair, that's perfect. Just let go of the character. Just do a body shake. There we go. Let go of the character. Perfect. Good. That is it. That is the exercise. And I'll go join you now and ask you some more questions about it.
Great.
Good job.
Thank you.
That was amazing. It was great. You totally became someone different there. Oh my gosh. Okay. Sorry. Yeah, I don't know if you're rolling, but anyway. Okay, so thanks so much for that, Angelique.
Of course, thank you.
You were so,
for the experience.
you were so fantastic. So I've done this exercise a few times in environments that are not exactly like this. This is very different with the lights and everything in an interview environment. But I wanted to share it with everyone because every time I've done this, even with writers who are not actors, it's incredible to me. When they sit in the chair, their body posture changes and something about their performance as the character is actually very real. And I could see that when you sat down here. So normally what happens is after this moment as a writer, if you're sitting at home and you're doing this at home, you can just jot down notes about the character that you've discovered. And I normally encourage people immediately afterwards, straight afterwards, go and make some notes because you may have discovered a little funny thing, interesting. And even if it's a tiny little thing, it could become one more of those pixels you said, like in creating the character that's becoming more real. So I just wanted to ask, Ange, what was it like for you when you sat in the character's chair? What did you feel?
Well, I approached her from the beginning of the inception of basically my story. So that's before she's really grown much or figured much out in terms of the short space of time that we spend with her. And I definitely felt more tension in my body. I felt uncomfortably different by societal standards and a little lonely, I think, like that kind of sense of not feeling connected to my surroundings.
Yeah. And what did you feel like when you saw the character? Could you sort of picture the character? I mean, I know you imagine. Yeah.
Yeah. I felt sorry for her, and I didn't actually. When I started off writing her, I didn't see her as a character who needed to be pitied. But watching her, I kind of just wanted to give her a hug. Yeah.
That's quite beautiful.
Yeah, definitely.
And did you see what she was wearing at all? Could you see a wardrobe, or was that? I mean, you don't have to because sometimes that's very difficult. But could you see something?
I did. She was definitely more fashion forward than me, but very comfortable. I saw her wearing like a colorful onesie and like big kind of interesting slippers because I kind of pictured her in a home environment, even though she felt uncomfortable. Often, at home is when you think when you're on your own, you think the most, and you end up in your head. So
fascinating. And were there any props when I said that? I mean, you don't have to necessarily, but sometimes it's. I guess the little slippers are like that. Sounds like a prop.
I didn't really picture props.
Yeah. It doesn't always happen. Sometimes it's, some characters will have like a pin protector or a Zippo light or something like that, and then that'll come to you at that point necessarily. And then when you became her and I asked you about if she had a goal or a want, did anything come to you in that moment?
I think a desire for acceptance and companionship.
Wow.
And also I wanted to add when you said, what does she see around her? I imagined her looking over the ocean and actually feeling quite unsettled rather than comforted by that, if she weren't, at home, based on her own phobias and things,
And then what did she think of you?
Well, she actually quite liked me.
That's good.
Well, I mean, I guess the character is age-wise kind of similar to me.
Okay.
I think I looking at myself in the seat, I imagined that we could be friends, even though I think I would have perceived, the character would have perceived me as perhaps being a little bit more together than she is, which is not necessarily the case at all. But, so
okay,
that,
cool.
I think was
Fascinating.
response.
Okay, great. Were there any other surprises or things that you discovered? I mean, you've just said so much, which for me has made the character come alive in a way that is not necessarily like, okay, she's this age and she comes from this place. But just by talking about her already, this is the thing, is just by doing this exercise, you kind of, suddenly the character feels like there's someone here, there's like a presence or a character here. But was it just as a matter of interest, was there anything that you felt doing it that was interesting? Or?
Yes, I will say that I hadn't actually pinpointed the feeling of not fitting in and the loneliness as being quite such a factor. So probably I'd want to focus on that theme a little bit more going forward, because I have the story, basically, you know, I've been working on the first draft, but I address it, but not exactly the way I think I could and should. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Good job.
Yeah, thank you.
That's it. You see, the thing is, we find very often in this exercise, we'll find that thing, and it's very often the theme or the thread, and we're like, oh, it's a thing I need to work in here because it's the core of the character.
Exactly.
Yeah, which is linked up to the emotional arc you were mentioning,
Exactly,
right? And that's
exactly.
the thing that we discover with this kind of an exercise, because we become the character in the moment. And that's what an actor will do when they're given a script, and then they'll realize, oh, wow, what's the arc? And you kind of have to work hard to create it in a story that's pretty bad. You know what I mean? You have to kind of like work hard. But if you can do this kind of assignment. Anyway, this exercise is something that I just really wanted to share, because as you can see, I get very excited about doing this kind of work. And this is the kind of work that I think a writer can do at home, even alone. You can just need 2 chairs, and you can just sit there, become the character for a moment, feel the character. And then it's very important to let go. Like, I mean, I know that Angie's, you know, a professional actor, so you knew how to just shake out the character, but it is important to lose the character as well. You don't want to emerge. That moment is very important. If you do this at home, make sure that you shake off the character and get rid of it, because otherwise you want to have that distinction. But yeah, I hope that's useful for you, and was maybe something that people can do at home. You can also extend this. Ange pictured her in the bedroom, which is actually great, because you can do this for your location. So you can actually then become your character in your different locations, look around the room and see what you see, and you might see a window, and there might be something beyond the window, and you might actually make discoveries of your locations. So in the book, there's another exercise about locations where you can actually inhabit your character in different locations and use your senses and your imagination to imagine what it sounds like and looks like and feels like. And then you become a real embodiment of the character on the screen. So, yeah.
Yeah, I like the idea of having multiple chairs for the different characters that you embody in.
And Andrew was actually mentioning earlier about how, you know, we're in an interview situation, so we're quite stagnant. But actually what's even better is walking and moving. You were talking about movement, right?
Yeah.
Like how we can't do it right now, but, you know, if you can walk like your character or move around the room, then it's like a whole other exploration. And that's all, I mean, all fun acting stuff. So,
Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
If you are writing a story, you may be interested in our new book, the sponsor of today's video. After months of working on a story, have you ever said to yourself, I don't know what my main character wants. Why are my side characters more interesting than my main character? 17 Steps is a workbook-style tool with specific questions to help you dive deep into your main character and story. We've linked up to 17 steps below. Now, back to the video. I love watching the two of you work together. I was curious, it seemed like you have empathy for this character. And then as the character, maybe you had empathy for the writer as well. What would happen if neither was available? Maybe you didn't write it, or maybe you didn't understand the character and it was a character you didn't necessarily like. How would that translate in body language, in tone, when you're sitting in these different chairs?
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, first I'll say I'll approach this question how I would playing a role, because I've had to play all sorts. And very often not very likable characters. And what I've come to realize is that there are many more common threads in people than you think, and ultimately the worse someone behaves, the more hurt they are. So even though there might be, say if I was creating a character that had quite a harsh energy and was quite antagonistic, there could have potentially been some tension there, but ultimately, I think the kind of power lies as a writer and an actor to see beyond that and see the layers, or try as much as you can. Because I mean, I know we all know people like this, right? Who have this very kind of strong physical facade, but actually there's so much going on behind that.
Yeah.
So maybe I would, in that instance, also allow the character to be seen maybe in more of a public environment, and then on their own or on a bad day when they're actually quite vulnerable, or speaking to the mom that triggers them, or something that is the cause of their hurt, to kind of understand them a little bit better. So it's not just one context. Because I was saying to Matthew the other day that, you know, we only really show our character as human beings in circumstances. So, you know, it's not like I sit in my chair and think,
exactly,
I'm trustworthy, I'm a bad driver, you know. You have to, you experience those things in environments. So anyway.
Yeah, it's like it's basically this thing about, and it's like, you know, you show it through action and engagement in the world and events, and you respond to events, and that reveals your character. You don't reveal. It's very difficult to show an actor or a character in isolation. It's hard to make dramatic, and I think it's that thing. But I did want to pick up on what you asked about, because I have had this a lot of times when I've done this assignment where. And I was really happy to see that you liked her and she liked you. And I was like, this is good. It actually feels to me that I've done this exercise where some writers don't trust this character or don't like this character, and then the character doesn't like the writer. And actually for me as a trainer, I'm like, wait a minute, something's wrong here. Something's going on here. If you can't feel empathy towards your character, if you can't be interested in your character, even if they are, like you were saying, someone who's pretty evil, it's okay if they're, because sometimes, like, I've had people who play characters like, writer, person's terrible. That's kind of okay from the character not liking the writer. But when the writer doesn't like the character, I'm normally thinking, wait a minute, something's up here, because you're not connecting to the empathy. Like you were saying, like there's always someone that hurt people, even somebody who's damaged. There's something in it. If you can't see that as a writer, it's problematic. So I think if a writer judges their character in this chair, it's normally a little bit of a red flag for me. But you know, if you are judging your character, that's okay. You can work through it, but try and look at them. If you do this exercise again, look at them from the perspective of trying to see what's inside them that is either a reflection of yourself or something that is a hurt person that you can then relate to. And then you'll create, especially with an antagonist, you'll create somebody who's maybe not a sort of a one-dimensional antagonist because they've got something of you in them. Yeah.
True. Matthew, you talk about the moment before the scene. What is that and how does this play out?
So again, this is an acting term which I came across, and I thought it can apply quite well to writers when writing a scene, because sometimes when we write a scene, we don't think about, we think of the scene in an isolated way. So it's like, say for example, the scene is John goes into his boss's room and gets fired, and John walks into the room, and there's two characters, John and his boss. And the scene begins with like, John opens the door, walks in, and the boss says, "You're fired," which would be a bad scene because that's too soon. But you know, maybe you want to start your scene like that. You're fired, and John has to respond in some way. And now you're writing the scene, and when the scene is actually written in the screenplay, it's like interior, office, day, and the scene begins. Now the scene before the scene might be, you know, John sleeping that night. And then there's a gap between John sleeping that night and John walking to the office. But there's a moment before the scene where John has to know what he was doing just before he walked into that room. And the boss even needs to know what he was doing before the scene begins. And it's an acting term called, I don't know if it's called this, but I call it this, the moment before the scene. It's where you get ready. It's like a given circumstance. It's not the given circumstance. It's like this thing where you as an actor have to inhabit a character. So you can't just walk into the room dead. You've got to walk in carrying the history of what's happened to you before that moment that you've walked into the scene. And very often actors make that up, right? I think it's like you kind of like, sometimes they just do it naturally, I think. I don't know how you do it, but you just kind of flow into the scene. And it's that flow that if you as a writer can know that that is something that's actually happening in the real world of your story, if you can know that the moment before the scene exists as a thing, it can sometimes inform the scene. So how does your character walk into the room? What are they carrying with them? Now, I'm not saying that you have to necessarily change the scene. Sometimes it will though. So maybe he's just been eating lunch and you're thinking, oh, he's just eating lunch. So he walks in with a hot dog or something. He's just finishing a hot dog as he walks in. It's going to be a funny scene. Or maybe, and this is where your imagination, you just make this stuff up, right? Obviously, as an actor, you can't just walk in with a hot dog because it's not in the script. But as a writer, you can use that impulse, that acting impulse of knowing that the character doesn't come out of nowhere into the scene to maybe relook at your scenes. Once you've written them, you can just say, oh, where was he just before the scene? Oh, yeah. Huh. Okay, that could bring an interesting energy into the scene. Maybe the boss is just finishing drinking a coffee and he's a bit wired, or maybe he's like sleepy. I don't know. I don't know how you found this as an actor, if you use this sort of a technique and how it is what is it like for an actor to just walk into a scene and suddenly just do it?
Well, I think but since we work from the page to the performance, we reverse engineer that.
Yes.
So, for example, going into the office, it'll be a question of, is this something my character does often and easily? Am I just going to drop an idea that usually is received well, some kind of brainstorming moment? Or am I going to ask for a raise? Because actually I've been mistreated for some time and I feel like I'm entitled, but I'm also really nervous. And that kind of thing then determines. And I think at least what I do, is I will always keep it in the emotional life will come through the physical body.
Yes,
so
exactly.
Through the breathing, through, like if I'm supposed to be nervous, I'll be pacing up and down. Like, very often you can, as with like the crying exercise, where you do the physical for the emotional to follow.
Yes.
So for example, there's a certain kind of breathing you can do to get the tears to roll, or if you pace up and down long enough, eventually your body starts to think that you're nervous. Or say you're supposed to have run around the block.
Yeah.
You have to make sure that you've run a little bit. And there's a sense of
Exactly.
exhaustion. So yeah.
Yeah. So what's interesting about what you were saying is like it's about how you walk into the room. So I just said in the script, John enters the room, right? But no, an actor will walk in, and there are an infinite amount of ways that they can walk into a room. Like you can open a door. Huh? You can open it all. Huh? That's just two. But you could do so many different ways of walking into a room. And this is the amazing thing about acting, actually, I find, is that there's infinite ways a character could walk into a room. But there's only one right way that character would walk into that room in that moment, in their character arc, right? And if you know that as a writer, you will be able to utilize every moment, every line that you can without overwriting, because you don't want to describe everywhere. But you could say John strides into the room, or John cautiously enters the room. So you can use little words to show what is in your brain as the writer, right? Again, it's all about words on the page, but it's using words on the page with an actor's intention. Then an actor will read out and they'll go, strides into, okay, cool, I can stride into the room. It gives me something to work. And then they can still work on why they're striding into the room, but then it gives them something, right?
Yeah, it's funny that you say that. I was literally going to say the same thing, that I think I tend to be more descriptive when it comes to I don't obviously have a direction on every line, but in terms of how they move or how they respond, and I try to keep the emotional beats quite clear throughout without directing the scene.
Yeah.
More so probably than others, because I'm always coming at it from...
Yeah. Well, you did it in the script that I've read of yours. It was perfect. It was just the right amount of
good.
things. Yeah. And this is the thing about an actor's script. The emotional beats are there. And of course, sometimes you get actors who just write the whole thing out, John opens the door and he's thinking about the way he felt earlier, and this kind of overwritten thing, and then he walks, and
think that the audience would never possibly know.
Exactly.
That unless you show it to them, they're not going to
but
understand.
if you still, you can just, and actually, weirdly enough, the walking thing and entering rooms thing is actually, the word walks in a script, you can actually use so many other ways, strides, you can just go to your thesaurus and look up work. It can tell you a lot about what
all the time.
Yeah, it's great, me too. Right-click thesaurus. And find ways that will describe what the actor's bringing into the scene. So yeah, that's the moment before the scene.
I'm curious, and maybe you already explained this, but maybe again, why is it important for the character to be seen by the writer and vice versa? Why is it, what was powerful about having these different seat changes?
So, I don't know if you have felt anything, but I think for me, it's mostly about, if you mean being seen, like when the writer imagines the character in their mind, it's very useful because then you can take whatever you've seen and put it on the page. But also it's to be seen and connected is kind of important, because I think it's got to do with that non-judgment thing I was talking about, where you don't judge your characters. If you can see them, and it's difficult because sometimes you see someone and you're like, oh my gosh, I can think of some people who I'm just like, oh my gosh, what are you doing on that stage? It's like this, not an actor, but what are you, if you see someone in life and you don't like them, but you can't write from that perspective. You've got to be able to see them. That's the importance of the chair, I think.
It's a very good question, actually. I would think also perhaps it's a way to ground the character. If you can imagine them sitting here right next to you in this chair, it's not so much in this kind of imagined world that's lofty and...
Yeah, exactly.
In
it's
that
not
way,
cerebral.
like literally, I've never thought whether we'd be friends or not. but
Yeah.
I think we would be. You know,
Yeah,
it's like
exactly.
something I would
Yeah,
never
yeah.
have considered before. And I am writing a character that is flawed, but ultimately that I like. And
Yeah.
it's good to know, I guess, and
Yeah.
obviously depends on the character, what you want to infuse there. But
Exactly, yeah.
Is that something you've done previously in your writing, Angelique, where you tried to imagine the character in your world if you saw them at a coffee shop or at an acting class?
no, but I really should start to do that. I haven't done that, no. I mean, I do definitely have very clear visualizations of my characters, the environments they're in. You know, Matthew can verify that I do like detail. I try not to go overboard, but I think it would be very useful, yeah, to see how they would interface with my environment, what they would make. Yeah, again, to make them, especially in this case, since it's a contemporary story, it would be apt, you know, maybe if they were from a different century. That would be a whole other thing, but
I think there's something about, see, Ange does this naturally because she's an actress, and this is the whole, or actor, and this is the whole thing, is that it's this thing that I think I may have started this conversation with. There's something very difficult to teach, maybe I didn't talk about this, which is the empathy that you have as an actor to imagine yourself into someone else's shoes. And Ange does this naturally because she's an actress. And it's like, and when you do that, it's difficult to imagine yourself into someone else's shoes, into this vacuum space where there's actually not a real world going on. You know, it's a bit about embodying and grounding the character and the person. And I think some actors can just do that. And some writers struggle with it, I think. And yeah, that's the point of this whole thing, is to be able to. And so I think Ange kind of probably, even though she hasn't done this exercise in this, or hasn't imagined her characters in everyday life, the world she's created is still real enough because you know how to do it as an actor. Yeah.
And I think also naturally I do really enjoy understanding the human psyche. That's probably why I'm drawn to acting. So the fact that I'm naturally someone who, I think I have quite good intuition when it comes to people, and then on top of that, when someone doesn't make sense to me, it's quite intriguing to me. I almost have to figure it out. And in that way, then, if you can translate that into your writing, I think it's so good for then making the motivations of the entire story so strong, because it's one thing to have a great idea and to have, you know, some twists and turns and reveals, you know, but ultimately I'm always going back to, would the character do this? Or if we need the character to get from A to B, that's not going to work. We have to find a different way, because that is not true to what their wants and needs are. And they kind of go to behavior and so on. But it's interesting, especially like you say, trying to understand all the characters, because I think that's actually one of the benefits of getting a little bit older in life, is you encounter more types, and you see more patterns, and you can really, you get a much better grasp on the human race. I mean, it's a work in progress, right? Forever. But it helps you to again ground and motivate all the characters in all their glory, because I think it can be very dangerous to oversimplify a character. Yeah.
And I wanted to pick up on one quick thing Ange said, which was that the thing about getting a character from here to here, right? And that motivation. This is the thing, is an actor, like as a writer, we just make them go from there to there because we want them to. And it's like, they don't want to. They're like, well, why? I don't want to go there. And then it's good to be open to that and listen to it. And like, I know some writers I've worked with are the writers who can like hear their characters in their head and like have conversations with them and stuff. I'm like, wow, that's amazing, because that's actually when they're really alive. It's like, well, why? I don't want to do that. I'm like, but I want you to do that. Well, then give me some motivation or something that's going to make me go and do this thing that you, the writer, want me to do. And this is where I think the two chairs is interesting, because it's like the writer is a person, the character is a person. And actually in the real world, the character is has its own autonomy as much as you do as the writer. And I think very often writers, because often writers are very plot driven, they make the characters do things. And then the characters are like, well, why am I going to do this? And then the writer's, well, so the movie can happen. And the character's like, oh, okay. And then they do it. But it's like, it results in stories that you're watching it and you're like, I'm not sure they would do that, right?
Yeah, and it's funny, the audience watches it and often wouldn't know why they don't like a story, why they think a movie's bad. And it really comes down to literally the page, the actor on the day. And I've been in that position for sure, where I'd have to literally help them rewrite or make suggestions for at least my character's entire kind of storyline for it to really work. And you just kind of, it's the path of least resistance to do something that doesn't exactly necessarily fit perfectly. And that's what, I think it always doesn't sit with the receiver, with that authenticity. Authenticity is a big one. That's actually what it all comes down to.
I think that's the key, authenticity.
And then that relates to relatability, and then you actually can take people on a journey, with the lead and all the other characters. But if they're not emotionally, that's what I always say at least. I enjoy movies where I can be invested, and it doesn't have to be a drama or anything intense. It can be silly, but if I don't care about the character, the lead character especially, I feel like what's the point? So your job is to make them care about them, not by making them perfect, but
making them real and authentic.
Making them real.
Which is what this is about.
Exactly.
You had said previously that you like characters that it's kind of hard to figure out who they are. Can you think of any that you would just love to play, or that it's just so wonderful to watch them, male or female? And same for you, Matthew.
Michael Corleone for me is the one I can never figure out from The Godfather. He's the ultimate character whose motivations are really complex. And I actually just watched this at Vidiots, which is this, I just went to see a screening of The Godfather there last night, I think it was. And I've seen that movie, I can quote almost the whole thing. I still don't 100% understand Michael's motivation, and not in a bad way. Not like, oh, that doesn't make sense, but more like, wow, you see, in the beginning he did that, then he did this, then And so he, for me, is a character that I'm always just like, wow. There's a moment where he goes, and Kay, his wife, who he's left behind, he went to Italy and he had this affair. We got married to another young woman. He goes back and he convinces her that he needs her and he loves her, and he puts her in this car. And it's just like, why are you doing this, Michael? You don't need this. Anyway, it's so fascinating. And anyway, so we could get into why he doesn't. The great thing is, as I've grown older and I've got to understand human beings a little bit more, like you were saying, my interpretation of The Godfather has changed through time. So now I'm like, yes, in The Godfather Part 2, he's left alone at the table when the whole family goes and greets his father, and he's feeling this like shame, and he's alone, and therefore in the story he's like, I don't want to spoil anything if you haven't seen it. But anyway, my understanding of The Godfather and Michael's motivation changes because I think he's a really complex character. So anyway.
For me, there's so many characters that are interesting and alluring to play, but I think I was particularly tickled. There are two performances that are somewhat parallel. One is Meryl Streep's in The Devil Wears Prada, more of a commercial movie, but I really enjoyed that dynamic and the way that she didn't have to raise her voice. She was just so empowered in her stillness. And a similar role is Patricia Arquette in Severance, if you haven't seen it yet. Ben Stiller's series that he directed. And she in that, she's so compelling. And I think it's honestly the feminist in me coming more and more alive the older I get, and especially interestingly since I've moved to LA 10 years ago. It's been a journey, but I feel like I just love powerful women, and they don't have to be mean or domineering necessarily. Perhaps those two characters are not the best examples in terms of being.
But they have it quietly.
They have it quietly. They are. The one in particular is a bit more malicious, but I think it's just exactly that quiet confidence that I just love, and I think I also look forward to playing those roles because I might play them when I'm a little older. I think I've done the love interests and the kind of forlorn, broken-hearted, younger type of character, and it's just exciting to move through life, all the different phases and what the different ages bring.
What's the difference between the writer's goals and needs and the character's goals and needs?
Good question. It feels like there's a lot of answers to this, and it has a lot of depth to it. I think one of the things in this exercise is that when you sit here and the character, one of the reasons I ask, like, what is your goal? What are your needs? As a character, it might surprise you as the writer what the character's goals and needs are. That's the thing. As a writer, it's a little bit like we were saying about controlling the character and where they go and what they do. We have a goal as a writer to like entertain an audience and to communicate things, but the characters actually sometimes have very different goals to what we want them to have. I don't know if that makes sense to you, but I have something else I can discuss, but it's linked to this, but it's slightly different. Maybe I should, unless you have something you want to add.
I'd like to add, I would like to just say that first of all, that's a great question, because that I think ultimately is one of the most difficult marriages to pull off, where you have, the parallel between the story, the overarching story, the beats, the rhythm, and then all the different characters and their wants and needs and how they're all interwoven together. And that's where you can have fun with dramatic irony, where the audience knows something the character doesn't. And what are those characters doing while these characters are, just about to die? Why is there no one to rescue them? And then who comes to rescue them? But what were they doing when they weren't here? It can get quite complicated, and especially, in my case, I'm in a third act of the same story that I was embodying the character of. And I have a lot of characters and a lot of moving parts, but the most important thing for me is that the story hits certain beats, and then trying to still give the protagonist that few final big moments, but all the other characters' loose ends need to be tied up. How one does that, I think sometimes it's literally just playing checkers and moving around different things. Could it be the dad? Could it be no? I think it should be the mother. Yes, the mother, because then when they go into the kitchen, the sister and the mother can fight with pots and pans and knives, and yes, and they can talk about how the daughter never wanted to learn cooking, and that's why she doesn't know what a mandolin is, as a weapon, and it that's kind of flies. But you need to, I think, be quite flexible and not be too married to the character's needs, and first see what serves the story in terms of what the beats require, and then I think like reverse engineer it. At least that's how I do it, and see which characters could have what motivations that would sing with that. And it can be, especially when it comes to action, it can be quite
It's
challenging.
like herding cats, basically. You've got all these cats, and they've all got these goals, and these, and they want to go, I want you to go here, and they're like,
Yes, exactly.
So I think that's and actually, it's interesting, this question. It's a very deep question. Actually, I have a chapter in my book called Character's Goal versus the Writer's Goals and Needs. I think I speak about it a little bit, but there is something about, even at a very basic level, especially with dialogue, actually, which we haven't spoken about that much, but dialogue is really interesting, because here is the thing. As a writer, when I'm writing a scene, I need to communicate that this character loves this character. So what I do, I go, I love you. And then they say, I love you. But the character's like, no way am I going to tell that person I love them. I like them too much. I'm not going to tell them I love them. I'm going to, like, if this is, say, for example, the first romance, and the woman who wrote Mudbound and directed Mudbound talks about this. She calls it the triple bumper theory. It's kind of an interesting notion, and I'll talk about it here as well briefly, which is that a character always wants to protect themselves in a way, and they're not going to, say for example, if the scene she uses is somebody is just meeting someone and they really like them. Now, as a writer, I'm starting a scene. I've got two characters in high school. I need to tell the audience that this character likes this character, right? That's my need. Because if I don't do that, then the next scene, when they do something to impress her, we won't understand why they're doing it. So I must tell the audience that this character likes this. So I just go, character X says, I like you. But an actor in that moment will go, I wouldn't say that. It's embarrassing. I'm at a high school. I'm not going to tell someone that. I'm going to say something else. Like I'm going to say, so, I like your sweater. or, I missed you in gym the other day, right? Small little things. And the triple bump theory is they're protecting themselves. They're not saying I like you. It's the subtext. The subtext is I like you. But a character would just say, nice sweater. that means I like you. And so that's where the character's needs in the scene, within a scene, not the overarching need but their need to protect themselves. And they still also want to tell the person they love them, but they're not going to do it like you, the writer, want them to. And this is where I see a lot of people actually writing very on-the-nose dialogue, because their need is to move the story forward. And so they make characters do things they wouldn't do. And it's a little bit like, instead of moving them around and character motivation, it's motivation to say things as well. Like, what are you going to really say? Are you really going to say that? No, I'm not going to say it. And you, as an actor, you get the lines, you're like, I wouldn't say that. Why would I say that? That's crazy. So that's also where that's a slightly different thing, because it's got to do with dialogue, but it's linked to your question.
And I want to say, I think when your character's motivation meets the needs of the script beautifully. For example, the character who was always selfish throughout his life has an amazing save the cat moment right towards the end, and the audience goes, oh, that is golden cinema. That is when you know you're doing something right. And sometimes you do lay so much pipe, so to say, to create a certain concept of a character that they won't do this or that, and then when they do something that surprises the audience but is still in alignment with who they are, at least how much they've grown, the audience gets such a kick out of that. Yeah. So many examples, like in horror movies, like in Barbarian, where she, despite nearly dying several times, goes back into the house and goes and tries to rescue the guy. And I won't say how that ends for her, but that is when it is quite exciting and satisfying, when those things align and you know that it's going to hit on not just a physical and a pace level, but an emotional level as well.
What happens when you know that the character's dialogue is something that they would not say? I mean, you were sitting there and I saw a character that was unsure and maybe even didn't want to speak. And what if there was a direction from a writer, or from a director, where they wanted you to say something, and in that moment, that character would be silent?
Absolutely.
So much can be said without dialogue, though, and I think maybe that's also the thing, which I think sometimes as writers we forget the power of silences and looks and things. Now, you can't just have your characters like glancing at each other in a screenplay, because sometimes it's not very clear, but the unsaid is so powerful, and actors know this actually, and actors have this incredible ability to also pause before they say the line. They understand the power of the pause, and they understand the power of the unsaid. So you can hold the space when somebody says, for example, in that scene with the jumper, like, oh, nice jumper. Now we're waiting, because someone has said something. Now the other character is going to go, thanks. But that moment of pause, right? My face did something, I don't even know what it was, but as an actor, there's a real power there. And I think for writers to understand the power of silence and the gaps in their script is really important.
Yeah, and showing, obviously, not telling. I think the things that ultimately come into play that you should constantly keep in mind when writing dialogue is all the different factors, like the power dynamic. Who in the scene feels more confident and more empowered? Who has the biggest desire? How are they educated? How that influence what they say? What kind of references are they using? What movies or books are they referring to? Their type of humor. And that can be quite hard to sustain throughout a story, but I think that is critical to establish the type of the humor, the cadence, that's more of a vocalized thing, but basically the speech rhythm, the kind of dialogue, and then how the character would interact with other characters in different circumstances, and sustaining that is the trick, because it's sometimes easy to get going with something, and then, I've sometimes been flawed where I'm in a situation where I think, well, I thought I knew this character, but gosh, how would they respond? But then I think it's also okay to sometimes almost like meditate on it, like sleep on it, daydream, go for walks. Absolutely. And sometimes you just don't have the answer. Yeah, and it comes to you eventually, because I liked how Matthew said it's like they almost embody a type of energy themselves. And if you stay with them, in fact, I have a slightly woo-woo story related to writing. I wrote my first screenplay, and about a year later, I reread it, realized it wasn't that great. It was school fees that I was happy to pay, part of my experience. And it took me pretty much the day to realize that I'm shelving that. I probably won't send it for more critique from anyone, but that I was ready to now receive my idea for my next story. And I thought, well, I'll start by writing down maybe 5 or 10 series or movies that I really like. Because what is my taste? What is my sort of, my genre, my thing? And I'm not kidding you, I was lying in bed that night and I thought, well, if there are such a thing as creative muses, I would like, or multiple muses, I would like to evoke them and ask if I could receive an idea. And I just did it. I said, well, creative muses, if you're out there, I'd love to receive my next idea. And I'm not kidding you, within literally 5 minutes of lying there, I started to download an idea, and I told my writing partner, and he's usually quite fussy with what ideas he likes of mine, and he instantly said, yes, I like it. And literally we'd call each other every 5 minutes and say, and then this and this and that, and go, yes, and this and this and that. And that's when you know that a story has a life of its own. And I think in that way, characters also, in a strange way, I know Elizabeth Gilbert has written about, the big, what's it called? I can't remember now. Anyway, she wrote a book about how creativity is like a river, and that if you don't basically, or like a stream of air, if you don't scoop it up, then it will move on to the next person. And I think in some ways the characters are similar. So you just have to live with them for a bit.
Yeah. It kind of links back to this whole idea of catching the big fish, just like being open and meditating and live with it and not stress about it. And I love this idea of invoking the muses and the intention. We're talking about intentionality and just going, okay, I think we can get in our own way very often, and invoking a muse or externalizing something a bit and realizing that there's a bigger purpose and a bigger thing out there can be very useful, actually.
Yeah, and like we said before, they, what can be quite a smudgy painting becomes more and more clear the more time you spend with them. With every draft, you learn a little bit more about the characters, and it's really fun time to live in that world with your characters. And that's what I've come to discover and love so much about writing, is it's my little world, and only the people who know about my story are privy to that. And sometimes I just want to talk about my world with someone and they don't have a clue what I'm talking about. But it's such a lovely privilege.
Last but not least, quirks and tics in body language. Ooh, there was a character I love to watch. I think it was Robin Wright, and she was anxious, but she would do this thing with her hands. She would it was almost like cracking the knuckles, but not quite. And that showed that she was in a place of not feeling comfortable, and that she was anxious. And I thought, wow, what a great, that said so much about the character.
A character that just came to mind to me is Gary Oldman in Slow Horses, another amazing series if you haven't watched it. And he is just the most foul, offensive human in his physical releases, shall I say. Out of nowhere you'll just hear a loud fart or a burp or something, and I'm not sure how much of that was written. I'd actually be very curious to know how much. I imagine it was, since it was, I think, based on a book. But I just loved it. I loved the fact that he was so unashamedly
and
himself.
I think part of this thing about when you sit in the character chair, I didn't actually ask you about this, but I do normally do this. I say, are there any things that you're feeling in your body that you feel that you want to do, and that becomes down to these tics or farts or whatever it is that somebody does. You can actually discover that when you embody the character, and I think some of these things are definitely discovered in the production as well. Where an actor will embody a character, and then because it's one thing writing in a story like Frank 21 neurotic. Okay, but how do you show neurotic? And then that's up to the actor to show. But I do think if writers know when they've written that word, that occasionally he'll do something that'll indicate it. It's the show don't tell thing, right? It's what are you doing that shows us that?
Yeah, it could be, like an old injury that makes them walk a certain way. Exactly. So I think there are ways to give clues without specifically directing, although, sometimes it's very tempting to do. But yeah, to kind of lay the foundation
Yeah.
so that the actors and the director
Exactly.
can get enough to work
Exactly.
with,
Yeah.
and they do appreciate it.
Yeah.
Then they can add to the creative process.
Exactly.
So
Exactly. It's a communication between you, the writer, and the team. And if you can inspire them to discover things that you didn't even know necessarily, but you've sent them in the right path, and they go off in that path that you have sent them on with your words on the page, you never know what they're going to discover, and it could be great.
Thank you for watching the video all the way to the end. Here is a complimentary question from our book Story Questions.